We are never more exposed, never more vulnerable to suffering, than when we love. Freud said it. And whether you agree with his theories or not, you've seen it play out. She doesn't want peace. She wants tension. Not because she's broken, not because she's cruel, but because her desire is wired into something far older than comfort: conflict. Freud saw it before the rest of us even had the words. That underneath every gentle touch, every sweet word, there's an unconscious hunger, not for stability, but for intensity. Not for affection, but for gravity. And if you, as a man, don't understand this, if you still think that being nice, consistent, emotionally available is the key to keeping her, then you've already lost. Because Freud revealed what most men still don't want to accept: female desire does not orbit around safety. It's drawn to danger, not the reckless kind, but the kind that doesn't need her. The kind of danger that stands still when everything else is moving. This isn't bitterness. This isn't misogyny. This is psychology. This is biology. This is thousands of years of instinct shaped by survival. Freud, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, dedicated his life to understanding the human psyche. And one question haunted him more than any other: what does a woman want? After decades of listening to patients, wives, lovers, daughters, mistresses, he came to a chilling conclusion. Even she doesn't fully know. But her body knows. Her instincts know. Freud believed desire, especially in women, wasn't about reason. It wasn't about what's right or polite, or even logical. It was primal, fluid, raw, and far more honest than what society allows. He once described female sexuality as a dark continent, not in a derogatory way, but to express how vast, how mysterious, how unexplored it was. And what he uncovered there wasn't comforting. He discovered that what women say they want, and what they respond to, are often completely different things. She tells you she wants a kind man, a man who listens. But she texts back the one who vanishes. She says she wants peace, but her heart races for the one who brings emotional chaos. She wants stability, yet obsesses over the one who doesn't return her calls. Why? Because desire doesn't follow logic. It follows lack. It follows tension. It follows mystery. When a man gives her everything, openly, easily, with no resistance, he becomes predictable. And predictable becomes boring. Boring becomes disposable. Freud called it the repetition compulsion, the unconscious pull toward relationships that recreate old emotional wounds. We don't chase what heals us. We chase what reopens the scars we never fully understood. And women, shaped by evolution to test and select under pressure, are drawn to men who activate that internal friction, not intentionally, but instinctively. That's why the man who withholds just enough, who doesn't seek validation, who doesn't jump through hoops to prove his value, that man becomes magnetic. Not because he plays games, but because he stays grounded. He's not swept up by her moods. He doesn't flinch when she pulls away. He doesn't beg when she goes silent. But no one teaches men this. You were told to be vulnerable, to be available, to be emotionally open at all times. So you poured your heart into text messages. You made yourself endlessly reachable. And then you watched her slowly drift away, without warning, without reason, without explanation. You thought something was wrong with you. But Freud would say, no, something's wrong with what you were taught about women. He believed that repression, especially sexual repression, was the foundation of modern civilization. But repression doesn't erase desire. It buries it. And when it's buried long enough, it doesn't disappear. It mutates. It turns into contradiction. Freud saw that women have been historically trained to behave one way: modest, nurturing, selfless, while their instincts were whispering something entirely different. Something wild. Something untamed. Something deeply real. That's why the fantasy of the bad boy never dies. He's not just a trope. He's an archetype. He represents the man who doesn't ask for permission, the man who isn't emotionally domesticated, the man whose sense of self doesn't shrink in her presence. And if you've ever wondered why being kind, available, loyal, still wasn't enough, that's why. You gave her everything. You picked her up. You posted her on your stories. You reassured her when she doubted herself. You tried so hard to be the perfect man, and it still didn't spark that fire. Because she didn't want your emotional exposure. She wanted your emotional center. The part of you that remains untouched by her mood swings. The part that doesn't chase when she pulls away. The part that can love her deeply without ever making her your purpose. Freud once said, "Anatomy is destiny." That quote gets misunderstood a lot. He didn't mean biology controls everything. He meant there are forces, deep, primal forces, that shape us long before we even understand them. And for women, one of those forces is the desire for tension, for polarity, for something strong enough to contain them, not through control, but through self-possession. That's why vulnerability, when it's used as a strategy to gain affection, doesn't work. It feels weak. It feels exposed. And exposure without power becomes unattractive. Women don't crave your openness. They crave your restraint. Your ability to feel everything and still remain steady. The man who wants her, but doesn't need her. The tragedy of modern relationships, Freud would say, is that men are trying to be safe instead of strong. They're trying to please instead of lead. And they end up becoming emotionally transparent, but sexually invisible. You were taught to reverse the polarity. To lead with emotion, not purpose. To show your wounds instead of your discipline. And now you're confused. Frustrated. Wondering why nothing sticks. Why the spark dies. Why she tests you, argues with you, pulls away at the height of intimacy. It's because she doesn't want harmony. She wants gravity. She wants to feel your spine, not your heart. She wants to know that no matter how beautiful she is, how emotional she gets, how close she gets to your core, you won't break. That you can love her without folding. That's what Freud understood. That love is not the opposite of tension. Love requires tension. Desire needs resistance. When everything is given, there is nothing left to earn. And when there's nothing to earn, there's nothing to feel. So the next time you wonder why being a good man wasn't enough, remember this: she doesn't fall for the man who gives her everything. She falls for the man who gives her nothing she didn't earn. You see, it's not that she wants chaos. It's that she wants to feel something. And the only thing that cuts through the noise of modern life, the only thing that makes her feel alive, is polarity. That sharp contrast between her storm and your calm. Between her emotion and your purpose. Between her need to test and your refusal to flinch. But they never taught you this. They told you love was about being gentle, soft, always available. And when that didn't work, when she walked away without a reason, when she grew cold while you stayed warm, you blamed yourself. You thought you were too emotional, too intense, too much. But really, you weren't too much. You were too transparent, too readable, too easy to predict. Freud called this the tragedy of the modern man. He wants to be both desirable and agreeable, both powerful and submissive, both masculine and emotionally tamed. But these qualities cancel each other out. Because desire isn't built on equality. It's built on tension. She wants to feel your strength, not just physically, but psychologically. The strength to say no without apology. The strength to stand still when she storms out. The strength to love her deeply without losing yourself in the process. Because when you lose yourself, when you orbit her instead of your purpose, she doesn't feel chosen. She feels burdened. She feels the weight of your emotional need. And she can't carry that. She's not built to carry that. She doesn't want to be your lifeline. She wants to be your lover. And this is where so many men fall. Not because they're weak, but because they were never shown how to lead with presence, not with pleading. They were never taught that masculine energy isn't about dominance over others, but dominance over self. And without that self-command, without that quiet, grounded center, your desire becomes noise. It becomes a cry for approval. And no woman is drawn to a man who needs her more than she needs herself. You were taught that love is about showing your soul. And sure, there's a time for that. But only after she respects your spine. Because if she sees your vulnerability before she feels your gravity, she doesn't feel intimacy. She feels imbalance. You see, she doesn't test you to hurt you. She tests you to find you. To find out where your line is. To see what you'll tolerate. What you'll compromise. Whether your love for her outweighs your love for yourself. Because once it does, you're no longer a man. You're an accessory. Replaceable. Predictable. Freud believed the unconscious mind doesn't respond to facts. It responds to energy, to symbols, archetypes, power dynamics, emotional contrasts. So when you give her your entire soul too soon, your thoughts, your fears, your trauma, without first establishing polarity, she doesn't feel safe. She feels smothered. Because emotional safety isn't created through exposure. It's created through containment. Containment is power. It's the ability to hold space without spilling into it. The man who can feel everything without reacting to everything, that's the man she trusts. That's the man she respects. That's the man she desires. And this is why the nice guy gets overlooked. Not because kindness is weak, but because his energy is leaking. He gives too much. Too fast. He needs too much. He shows too much. And that transparency, while well-intentioned, erases the mystery, the tension, the unknown. And female desire, Freud argued, needs the unknown. Not because she's manipulative. Not because she's playing games. But because desire only exists where there's uncertainty. The moment she fully has you, she no longer feels the need to chase you. And if she's not chasing you, even just subtly, her interest begins to fade. Again, this isn't cruelty. It's unconscious design. Her biology doesn't respond to comfort. It responds to challenge. Not toxic challenge, but internal challenge. The kind that makes her feel she has to rise to meet your level of discipline, focus, and direction. This is why the men she obsesses over are rarely the ones who treat her the best. It's not that she wants to be mistreated. It's that she wants to be captivated. And that captivation comes from tension, emotional, psychological, and sometimes even spiritual. But here's what most men get wrong. They confuse containment with coldness. They think being strong means being distant, emotionless, detached. That's not it. Containment is not about closing off. It's about not being owned by what you feel. It's about feeling everything and still standing tall. And that's the paradox. The more you give her in hopes of being chosen, the more you make yourself invisible. Because you've reversed the polarity. You've given up your edge. And she feels that. Not in her mind. In her body. Her nervous system registers your need as weakness. Your overavailability as lack of self-direction. So what's the answer? Freud had a term for it, sublimation. It's the process of taking those raw, primitive urges, your lust, your anger, your heartbreak, and turning them into something higher. Turning pain into purpose. Turning desire into discipline. Turning rejection into focus. Because the man who can transmute his chaos is the man she cannot ignore. That's the man she respects. That's the man who walks into a room and doesn't need to prove himself, because his presence already speaks. His silence has weight. His mission is clear. His love, when offered, is a gift, not a request. And when you become that man, you stop needing her to complete you. And in that moment, when you no longer need her, something strange happens. She leans in. she looks again. She feels that shift. Because now, you are no longer chasing. You are becoming. You are no longer reacting. You are creating. This is what Freud knew would be controversial. That love is not built on equality. It's built on energetic polarity. That a woman does not surrender to your vulnerability, she surrenders to your self-mastery. Not because she's shallow, not because she's fragile, but because her deepest feminine instinct is to give herself to something stronger than her chaos. And you don't get there by watching more videos or quoting more theories. You get there by rebuilding the architecture of your own soul, by choosing your purpose over your cravings, by walking away from what dims your fire, by becoming the man who leads, not follows, who creates, not reacts. That's the real transformation. Not from weakness to force, but from chaos to clarity. You don't become the man she craves by posturing or pretending to be something you're not. You become him by returning to what was buried, your purpose, your edge, your discipline. The part of you that doesn't flinch when she tests you. The part that doesn't disappear when she pulls away. The part that moves forward, no matter who stays or leaves. You see, she doesn't actually want control over you. She wants to feel that she can't control you. That's where the spark lives. That's what awakens the feminine instinct to surrender, not to a man who dominates her, but to a man who is already in control of himself. A man whose mission is bigger than her moods. A man who does not apologize for his presence. And the more you try to be chosen by bending, by catering, by emotionally unraveling for her approval, the more you lose the very gravity that made her look at you in the first place. Because once she knows she has you, completely, emotionally, predictably, her nervous system starts to relax, yes. But that same relaxation kills attraction. Because attraction isn't built in still water. It's born in waves, in mystery, in contrast. You were told to soften yourself, to make her comfortable, to prioritize her emotions over your own direction. And now you live confused, asking yourself why she argues, why she grows restless, why she loses interest just when you thought the bond was strongest. She pulls away not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped doing what kept her inspired. You stopped leading. You stopped being unpredictable. You became emotionally owned, and that kills desire faster than anything. Freud wasn't condemning love. He wasn't anti-connection. He was obsessed with understanding its deeper layers. And what he discovered was this: love without psychological strength is fragile. It's unstable. And ultimately, it fades. He wrote that repression, the pressure to behave, to conform, to play nice, doesn't destroy desire. It hides it. It twists it. And when men repress their masculine edge, their ambition, their refusal to be moved by emotional chaos, they lose more than attraction, they lose themselves. And what you must realize is that women aren't the problem. They're the mirror. They reflect the state of your center. When your frame is solid, when your path is clear, when you don't need her affection to define your worth, she feels that. And something in her relaxes into you. Something ancient. Something real. Because she doesn't want to lead the dance. She wants to feel the rhythm of your conviction and move with it. She wants to trust that even in the middle of emotional storms, you won't collapse. You won't beg. You won't panic. She wants your warmth, but only when it's coming from a man who doesn't give it away cheaply. A man who's earned it through mastery, through sublimation. Sublimation is taking all your hunger, all your sexual energy, your emotional cravings, your desperate need to be seen, and forging it into something greater. It's what turns pain into power, chaos into clarity, lust into legacy. And that is what she's drawn to. The man who could have crumbled, but didn't. The man who could have begged, but didn't. The man who could have chased her into the night, but instead walked into his own light. When you live like that, you stop seeking her approval. You stop trying to prove your value. You become the value, not in arrogance, but in quiet certainty. And that's when everything changes. The same women who dismissed you start to look again. Not because you did anything to impress them, but because your energy no longer screams, "Please see me." It radiates, "I see me." And that's enough. She can feel that. She may not understand it. She may not even admit it. But her body knows. Her nervous system knows. Because that kind of man, the one who doesn't flinch, doesn't fold, doesn't beg, is rare. And rare things awaken something primal. That's why when you stop orbiting her emotions and start orbiting your purpose, you become magnetic. That's why when you stop chasing her attention and start walking with direction, she becomes curious again. Because now you're not just emotionally available, you're emotionally sovereign. You don't need her to feel like a man. You already are one. And this is what modern men have forgotten. That desire isn't about full exposure. It's about selective mystery. That love isn't about being chosen. It's about becoming someone worthy of being chosen. And that worth doesn't come from emotional oversharing. It comes from emotional self-command. You don't need to manipulate her. You don't need to impress her. You need to anchor yourself. The more rooted you are, the more she feels safe surrendering, not because you promise safety, but because your energy is safety. Not the safety of comfort, but the safety of unwavering direction. Freud believed the ego, the self, wasn't meant to be erased. It was meant to be sharpened, refined, strengthened. Because a man who hasn't mastered himself cannot lead a woman. He can only follow her moods, her needs, her tests. And she doesn't want that. She wants to lean into a man who stands still while the world spins. So stop trying to be perfect. Stop trying to be her fantasy. Start being centered. Start building a life that doesn't revolve around female validation. One that doesn't need approval. One that doesn't shrink every time a woman withdraws. Because here's the truth Freud knew would make people uncomfortable. Women are not drawn to your soul until they respect your spine. And respect cannot be negotiated. It is earned through silence, through presence, through direction. You were taught to lead with your heart. But Freud would say, first, you must lead with your spine. Because without structure, the heart collapses. Without containment, love becomes chaos. And when you give away your masculine center to buy closeness, you don't receive love, you receive compliance. And compliance never lasts. So what now? Return to yourself. Not the version of you shaped by pain, or rejection, or need, but the version that exists beyond all that. The version that walks forward with or without her. The man who builds, who creates, who leads. When you become that man, everything changes. The games stop. The begging ends. The silence becomes your strength. And she feels it, not just emotionally, but physically. Because female desire is ancient. And it bows, not to the man who offers the most, but to the man who needs the least. This is your call. Not to harden, not to hate, but to remember who you are. You were never meant to be passive. You were never meant to kneel for affection. You were meant to lead, with vision, with presence, with purpose. She is not your prize. She is your reflection. Lead yourself, and she will follow. Orbit her, and she will run. So choose wisely. Build deeply. Lead powerfully. And never again forget, you are not here to be chosen. You are here to become.